They did not begin as emperors. They began as refugees, standing ankle-deep in lake mud, surrounded by cities that considered them useful in war and disposable in peace. No marble throne waited for them. No empty continent invited conquest. The basin of Mexico was already crowded with rival powers, old bloodlines, and armed borders. Yet on an exposed island in Lake Texcoco, the Mexica founded a settlement that would become Tenochtitlan, one of the largest and most formidable cities in the Americas. Later generations said an eagle had marked the place. But beneath that sacred image lies a darker question. Did prophecy create the empire, or did a desperate people turn humiliation into a weapon? The year traditionally given for the foundation is 1325. That date appears in Mexica historical memory, although cities do not rise in a single day, and the island may already have held inhabitants. What happened there was not a miracle frozen in one perfect moment. It was a process. Migration became settlement, settlement became submission, and submission became revenge. The people who built the city called themselves Mexica. Aztec is the name most of the world would later use, connecting them to Aztlan, the homeland from which their ancestors were said to have departed. But Aztlan itself lives somewhere between geography and sacred memory. Its location has never been securely identified. The surviving migration stories were recorded or recopied after the Spanish conquest, and they do not all agree. They offer history braided with ritual, political legitimacy, and myth. In those accounts, the Mexica moved south under the command of Huitzilopochtli, their patron deity associated with war and the sun. He does not guide them toward comfort, he demands movement. At every temporary home, the possibility of rest is interrupted by conflict, divine command, or both. Generations pass beneath the same burden. Keep walking until the god reveals the place where wandering must end. When the Mexica entered the basin of Mexico, they did not enter an empty wilderness. They came late into a landscape already divided among sophisticated city-states. Culhuacan claimed descent from the prestigious Toltec past. Azcapotzalco commanded growing Tepanec power. Other communities controlled farmland, springs, trade routes, and the political marriages that made rule legitimate. The newcomers possessed none of those advantages. They had something the valley could use, however. They could fight. Mexica warriors entered the service of stronger rulers, gaining a reputation for discipline and ferocity. That relationship was never equal. They could be hired, moved, rewarded, or expelled. To established elites, they were outsiders without a royal pedigree. To the Mexica, service offered a narrow road into the political world that rejected them. Later chronicles place one of the most disturbing episodes of their migration at Culhuacan. According to those accounts, the Mexica requested a ruler's daughter, saying she would be honored and transformed into a goddess. The ruler agreed. When he entered the ceremony, the story says, he discovered that she had been sacrificed and that a priest wore her skin as part of the ritual. We cannot read that scene like a modern police report. It reaches us through sources written long after the alleged event, and its details carry the structure of sacred and political storytelling. But the purpose of the story is unmistakable. The Mexica were not merely misunderstood refugees. They followed a religious logic their neighbors could find terrifying, and the rupture with Culhuacan became an explanation for why they were driven away once again. Their enemies pursued them toward the western waters of Lake Texcoco. The old version of the story turns the lake into a poisonous wasteland, but that image goes too far. The lake zone was difficult, saline in places, and vulnerable to flooding. Yet it was also alive with fish, waterfowl, reeds, insects, salt, and intense human activity. The island was not worthless, it was marginal, and that distinction mattered. The strongest powers had already taken the best land. A small island offered fewer fields and fewer springs, but it also offered distance. Water could isolate the Mexica from an immediate attack. Reeds could become roofs, mats, baskets, and barriers. Canoes could travel where marching armies could not. The place looked like a trap because the Mexica were weak. In time, the same geography would look like a fortress. Then came the sign. Modern memory has fixed it into a single image. an eagle perched on a nopal cactus, devouring a serpent. But the early traditions are not that uniform. In different versions, the eagle appears alone, consumes a bird, tears at a serpent, or carries the symbol of sacred war. Some accounts connect the cactus to the heart of Copil, an enemy of Huitzilopochtli, cast among the reeds after his defeat. The familiar emblem is therefore not a photograph of one witnessed event. It is a foundation symbol that changed as the nation telling the story changed. Its power did not depend on literal consistency. The eagle embodied the solar and martial force of Huitzilopochtli. The nopal rose from stone, where survival appeared impossible. Together, they transformed unwanted ground into chosen ground. The Mexica no longer had to admit that they had been forced to the edge of the political world. Their god had selected the edge. Exile became pilgrimage, defeat became fulfillment, mud became sacred territory. That reversal may be the most important weapon they ever created. Around 1325, the settlement remembered as Mexico Tenochtitlan took form. Its first structures would not have resembled the monumental capital seen by the Spaniards nearly 2 centuries later. The early community was small, exposed, and dependent. Its people still needed food, timber, stone, and fresh water from territories controlled by others. Worse, they lived under the shadow of Azcapotzalco and its Tepanec rulers. The future masters of central Mexico began their urban life paying tribute. They survived by learning the lake more completely than their enemies understood them. The Mexica expanded and maintained raised agricultural fields, known as chinampas. They are often called floating gardens, but they did not drift freely across the water. Farmers constructed long plots in shallow lake zones, building them with layers of mud and organic material, stabilizing edges with woven barriers and trees, and cutting canals around them. The wet soil could be exceptionally productive. Canoes moved crops toward the city while canal sediment returned fertility to the fields. This technology was not invented from nothing by the Mexica. Forms of raised field agriculture already existed in the region. Their achievement was to use the aquatic landscape at an extraordinary urban scale. They did not conquer nature with one flash of genius. They inherited knowledge, organized labor, expanded land, and made water part of the city's machinery. Every canal became a street. Every canoe became a cart. Causeways tied the island to the shore, while removable bridges and narrow approaches could complicate an enemy advance. Dikes would later help manage floods and separate fresher water from saltier zones. Aqueducts carried spring water from the mainland. Temples rose in repeated construction phases, each new structure covering or enlarging an older one. Tenochtitlan was not built once. It was built over itself, generation after generation, as though the city were shedding skins. But engineering alone did not free the Mexica. For decades, they remained entangled in Tepanec power. Azcapotzalco used Mexica fighters in its wars and demanded tribute in return for political survival. This dependency sharpened the very skills that would later make Tenochtitlan dangerous. Mexica leaders learned how rival cities calculated loyalty. Their warriors learned the roads, defenses, and weaknesses of neighboring states. Their nobles learned that bloodline mattered, but alliances could manufacture legitimacy when ancestry was not enough. The decisive break came a century after the traditional foundation date. When the Tepanec ruler Tezozomoc died, a succession crisis destabilized the region. Maxtla emerged as the dominant figure in Azcapotzalco and moved against enemies who threatened his position. Tenochtitlan faced a choice more brutal than the old choice at the lake: submit and remain useful, or rebel and risk extinction. The Mexica ruler Itzcoatl chose rebellion. He did not do it alone. Tenochtitlan joined with Texcoco, led by Netzahualcoyotl, and with Tlacopan. Their forces defeated Azcapotzalco in 1428. From that victory emerged the Triple Alliance, the political and military structure commonly called the Aztec Empire. This is where the comforting survival story becomes something colder. The refugees did not simply escape oppression, they mastered its architecture. tribute that had once flowed out of Tenochtitlan now flowed inward from defeated communities. Maize, cotton, cacao, feathers, textiles, military equipment, labor, and luxury goods. Conquest fed markets. Markets fed the capital. The capital fed armies that made further conquest possible. The island city became the center of a machine whose fuel came from far beyond the lake. Its rulers understood that terror could travel farther than soldiers. Foreign nobles entering Tenochtitlan crossed long causeways over open water. They saw canals crowded with canoes, markets dense with goods, temples dominating the sacred precinct, and a population supported by tribute from distant provinces. Architecture delivered a warning before diplomacy began. Resistance would not confront one tribe in a swamp. It would confront a capital able to concentrate the wealth and manpower of an expanding alliance. Religion gave that power a cosmic scale. To the Mexica, the world was not permanent. They lived in the era of the fifth sun, one creation after earlier worlds had ended in catastrophe. The sun's movement and the continuation of life depended on reciprocal obligation between humanity and the gods. The gods had sacrificed, human beings owed a return. Blood, offerings, ritual performance, and at times human lives helped maintain an order that could otherwise collapse. This belief did not make the Mexica uniquely alien in Mesoamerica. Human sacrifice existed in the region before their rise, and religion cannot be separated neatly from politics anywhere in the ancient world. Yet in imperial Tenochtitlan, sacrifice became inseparable from state power on a vast public stage. Captives could be transformed into offerings. Their deaths honored deities, displayed victory, rewarded warriors, and reminded subject cities who controlled the sacred center. The original script claims that the Mexica fought wars only to capture living victims. History is more complicated and more disturbing. They fought for tribute, territory, security, trade routes, prestige, and political dominance. Captives mattered, especially in ritualized conflict, but they were one part of an imperial system. The Mexica did not build an empire merely because their gods were hungry. Their rulers also understood resources, logistics, intimidation, and opportunity. That combination made Tenochtitlan formidable. Faith did not replace strategy, it sanctified it. A farmer dredging mud from a canal helped feed warriors he might never meet. A tribute collector recording bolts of cloth helped sustain ceremonies at the sacred precinct. A conquered town sending maize to the capital also sent proof of submission. The city linked ordinary labor to imperial violence so completely that the beauty of the system and the brutality of the system became impossible to separate. And the beauty was real. At its height, Tenochtitlan astonished outsiders with its order, scale, markets, temples, gardens, waterways, and whitewashed buildings. But wonder should not erase the cost. The same causeways that carried merchants into the city carried tribute extracted under threat. The same temples that organized sacred time staged deaths designed to speak to gods and human enemies at once. The same disciplined administration that moved food across the lake could mobilize armies across central Mexico. The eagle on the cactus had become more than a promise of home. It had become an argument for rule. Later, Mexica power reshaped memory around that argument. A chosen people had not seized land because politics rewarded strength. They had arrived where the god commanded. Their victories were not accidents of alliance and timing. They were the unfolding of destiny. Their capital was not an improvised refuge that escaped the control of stronger neighbors. It was the center, marked by the sun. That does not make the story false. It reveals what foundation stories do. They take chaos and force it into a pattern. They turn suffering into proof, enemies into obstacles, and survival into permission. For a people long treated as intruders, the story of divine selection answered the deepest humiliation. No human king had given them the island, so no human king could deny their right to it. But every story that grants destiny can also excuse domination. The Mexica had known what it meant to pay tribute, to fight for other rulers, and to live at the mercy of stronger cities. When power finally shifted, they did not dismantle that world. They placed themselves at its center. Their past made them resilient. It did not make them merciful. That is the dark transformation at the heart of Tenochtitlan. The lake did not magically turn outcasts into emperors. It gave them time. Engineering gave them food. Service gave them military experience. Alliance gave them victory. Tribute gave them scale. Religion gave the entire structure meaning, and a language in which conquest could sound like cosmic necessity. Less than 2 centuries after the traditional founding, the city would face invaders from across the ocean, indigenous enemies eager to break Mexica power, epidemic disease, siege, hunger, and destruction. The waterways that had protected Tenochtitlan would become channels of encirclement. The causeways that made the island defensible would become routes the attackers fought to control. The fortress born from isolation would discover that no geography remains invincible forever. Yet the fall does not erase the achievement, and the achievement does not erase the terror. So what truly founded Tenochtitlan? A sacred sign, an act of political reinvention, or the refusal of an unwanted people to disappear? And when survival becomes empire, at what point does resilience become the justification for cruelty? Tell us where you draw that line in the comments. Subscribe to the History Ledger and continue with us into the next civilization whose monuments conceal a human cost. Empires rewrite their beginnings, but the ledger remembers what they became.